The royal wolf was supposed to be dead. Claire Whitaker heard those words later, after the river, after the headlights, after the crown guard came looking for what she had dragged out of the water with both hands and half a prayer. But in that moment, standing on the cracked shoulder of Blackwater Bridge with rain running down her neck, she didn't know she was breaking crown law. She only knew something huge was caught below in the flooded dark, fighting the current and losing. Claire had been checking illegal traps along the river because somebody had been setting them close to Silverpine territory, and low-rank Omegas were apparently good enough to clean up other people's messes, just not important enough to be listened to when they warned the pack about it. Then she heard the sound. Not a howl, not a growl, a thin, broken breath under the roar of the river. She swung her flashlight down and froze. A silver-gray she-wolf was pinned against a fallen cottonwood, one foreleg tangled in wire, her body curved protectively around her swollen belly. Pregnant. Claire's chest went tight. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, already climbing over the guardrail. Her brother Mason would have called that stupid. The pack elders would have called it illegal. Claire called it Tuesday, because scared animals didn't care about titles. The mud slid under her boots. Cold water slapped her knees, then her thighs. The wolf lifted her head, eyes bright gold in the beam, and showed teeth long enough to make any sensible person reconsider every choice since breakfast. Claire stopped 6 feet away and raised both hands. "I get it. Bad night. Strange woman. River trying to kill you. I'd be rude too." The wolf's ears twitched. The current shoved hard at Claire's legs. She tied her rescue rope around her waist, hooked the other end to the bridge rail, and moved closer inch by inch. "I'm not here to own you," she said, keeping her voice low. "I'm here to get you breathing." The wolf snapped once near her sleeve, not quite touching. A warning. Claire nodded like they had reached a business agreement. "Fair." She slid one hand under the wire, felt the animal trembling, and then her palm brushed the wolf's belly. 3 tiny pulses answered her. Faint, uneven, alive. Claire went still. Her gift had always been quiet, the kind nobody could prove until it mattered. She could feel life the way other people felt heat through a coffee mug. And those pups were fading. "No," Claire said, suddenly sharp. "Not tonight." The wolf stared at her. Something passed between them. Not words, not trust, but the smallest decision not to give up at the same time. Claire worked the wire loose with numb fingers, murmuring nonsense because silence felt too much like surrender. "You are way too pregnant to be this dramatic, ma'am. Let's save the river performance for someone with fewer responsibilities." The wolf huffed, weak but offended, which Claire took as progress. When the last loop came free, the current tried to steal them both. Claire dug her boots into the riverbed, pulled the rope until her shoulder burned, and dragged the wolf toward the bank one brutal foot at a time. By the time they reached the grass, Claire was shaking so hard she could barely open the blanket from her truck. The wolf collapsed beside her, huge head landing across Claire's muddy boot, like she had decided this exhausted Omega was now her problem. Claire laughed once, breathless and close to tears. Then her flashlight caught something beneath the wet fur at the wolf's neck. A burned mark, half hidden, shaped like a crown inside a crescent moon. Claire's smile died. Every child in Silverpine knew that crest. It belonged to the throne. Far away, deep in the mountains, a wolf howl rose. Then another. Then the whole forest answered like the kingdom had just woken from a lie. Claire looked down at the pregnant wolf breathing against her leg and whispered, "What the hell did you just bring to my door?" Claire got the wolf into the greenhouse because the cabin was too small for an animal that looked like she had been built by a storm with opinions. The greenhouse was old, patched with plastic sheets and duct tape, but it held heat well enough, and right now heat mattered more than dignity. Claire spread every clean towel she owned across the potting floor, then looked at the wolf and said, "You are going to owe me a washing machine." The wolf blinked at her with royal exhaustion, which was apparently still exhaustion, just more judgmental. Claire worked quickly. She cut away the last pieces of wire, cleaned the mud from the injured leg, and wrapped it with the same steady hands she used on frightened strays, half-feral pups, and one very dramatic raccoon who had once convinced the county deputy it was possessed. This wolf did not cry out. She only watched Claire with those gold eyes, one paw resting protectively over her belly. "I know," Claire said softly. "They come first." She placed her palm against the swollen side again. 3 tiny heartbeats fluttered under her touch. One was stronger now. One was stubborn. The third worried her. Claire swallowed and reached for the warming packs. Come on, little one. You do not get to quit before breakfast. The back door opened, and Mason stepped in carrying a stack of blankets and the face of a man who had already prepared a lecture. He got exactly 3 feet inside before the wolf lifted her head and let out a low growl that made the glass panes hum. Mason stopped so fast one blanket slid off the pile. Claire, do not move. I was not planning to start a tap dance. Put the blankets down slowly. Mason obeyed, eyes locked on the wolf. He was a beta, 22, built like a linebacker, and still smart enough to know when a pregnant she-wolf had voted against him. Please tell me that is not what I think it is. Claire kept wrapping the bandage. That depends. Are you thinking extremely large wolf with a terrible evening? I am thinking royal guardian. Claire said nothing. Mason saw her silence and lost color. Claire, I found a burned crest. You touched a royal wolf. I rescued a pregnant mother from a flooded river. The crown does not love that distinction. The crown can come pull its own wolves out of rivers next time. The wolf huffed, and Claire almost smiled because it sounded dangerously close to agreement. Mason dragged a hand over his face. If the elders find out, they will say you concealed royal property. Claire looked up then, slow and tired. She is not property. The greenhouse went quiet except for rain ticking against the roof. Mason lowered his voice. You know that is not how they will see it. Then they can learn. He stared at her like she had just suggested teaching manners to a tornado. Claire ignored him and mixed broth with a little honey and salt. The wolf sniffed it, suspicious. Yes, it is ugly, Claire said. So is dying. Drink. After a long pause, the wolf drank. Mason blinked. How did you do that? Claire did not answer right away. Her gift was the kind of thing people loved in emergencies and feared at meetings. She could feel the pups settling, their tiny lives tugging at her nerves like 3 threads tied around her ribs. She could also feel something else now, faint and far away, pulling from the north. A pressure in the air, a command looking for the missing piece of itself. At Silverpine Hall, someone powerful had noticed. The wolf suddenly turned toward the mountains. Every old rescue wolf in Claire's yard lifted its head at the same time. Mason whispered, "They are coming." Claire wiped mud from the wolf's neck and uncovered the damaged crest again. Beneath the burn, the mark still shone silver in the greenhouse light. The wolf pressed her nose against Claire's wrist, leaving a warm scent mark on her skin. Mason saw it and went completely still. "Claire," he said, quieter now, "that is a protection claim." Before she could answer, headlights swept across the greenhouse walls. 1 pair, then 3, then 6. Black sport utility vehicles rolled up the gravel drive and stopped in front of her cabin like a verdict wearing high beams. The first man out of the lead sport utility vehicle did not slam the door. He closed it softly, and somehow that was worse. Every wolf in Claire's yard lowered its head before he reached the porch. Even the half-blind old rescue wolf under the steps stopped pretending to sleep and decided, with impressive speed, that obedience had always been his favorite hobby. Claire stood in the greenhouse doorway with mud on her jeans, river water still drying in her hair, and a bandage wrapped around one wrist. Mason moved beside her, not in front of her, because he knew she would kick his ankle if he tried. The man crossing the gravel wore a black wool coat, dark boots, and no crown, but the air around him carried the kind of authority that made titles unnecessary. Alpha King Nolan Ashford looked younger than his official portraits and more tired than any king had a right to look. His gray eyes moved over the cabin, the greenhouse, Mason, then Claire, stopping on the scent mark at her wrist. Something in his face tightened. Not anger. Recognition, maybe. Or the beginning of a problem he did not want to name. Behind him, crown guards spread out with careful silence. Claire lifted her chin. This is private property. Mason made a very small sound beside her, the sound of a man watching his sister take a hammer to royal etiquette. Nolan stopped 6 feet away. Claire Whitaker. His voice was low, controlled, and rough around the edges, like he had not slept since the mountain started howling. You have a royal guardian wolf inside. I have an injured pregnant wolf inside. You knew what she was. I knew she was breathing. One of the guards shifted like he wanted to correct her. Nolan raised one hand, barely an inch, and the guard went still. Claire noticed that. Power did not have to show off when it was real. Nolan's gaze dropped to her muddy boots, then back to her face. I need to see her. Do you have a warrant, an emergency healer order, or just the traditional royal confidence that doors open because you are standing near them? Mason whispered, Claire, please develop fear. Nolan looked at Mason. Mason looked at the gravel. Claire did not. For one long second, the rain was the only thing talking. Then, to everyone's surprise, Nolan said, An emergency healer order is in the second vehicle. You may read it before I enter. Claire blinked. She had been ready for a threat. She was less prepared for paperwork. Fine. A guard brought the document. Claire read every word while the Alpha King of Silverpine waited on her porch in the rain. That alone was probably enough to give 3 council elders chest pain. When she finally opened the greenhouse door, Briar lifted her head from the towels. Nolan stepped inside and stopped like the whole room had reached into his chest. Briar, he said. The name came out too quiet for a command. The wolf's ears folded back. Her tail moved once against the floor. Claire watched Nolan's face break for half a heartbeat before he locked it down again. There he was, she thought. Not the king. The man who had believed this wolf was dead. Nolan took one step closer. Briar allowed it. A royal healer followed him in, carrying a polished leather bag and an expression that said he had never been argued with by greenhouse plastic. The moment he reached toward Briar, she growled so hard the tomato steaks rattled. Then she dragged herself, weak leg and all, until her body blocked Claire from him. Nolan stared. The healer went pale. Claire crouched beside Briar and placed a hand on her neck. Easy, mama. Nobody touches you unless you say so. Briar settled instantly. The room changed. Nolan looked at Claire's hand on the wolf, then at the scent mark on her wrist, and something old and dangerous woke in his eyes. Claire felt it too, a sudden pull under her ribs, warm and alarming, like a door opening in a house she had never entered. She stood too fast. Nolan's jaw flexed. Neither of them said a word. Outside, another car rolled up. An older man in a charcoal suit stepped out, silver hair neat, smile thin as a blade. Mason muttered, Elder Graves. The man reached the doorway and looked from Briar to Claire with open disgust. Your Majesty, he said, this Omega has concealed crown property. She should be detained before she causes more damage. Briar rose with a snarl. Nolan did not look away from Claire. And Claire, tired, soaked, and officially done with rich men calling mother's property, said, Try it. Nolan did not let Elder Graves touch Claire. He did something worse, at least for the old man's blood pressure. He stepped between them without raising his voice and said, Briar goes where she chooses. Right now, she has chosen Miss Whitaker. The greenhouse went so quiet Claire could hear rain sliding down the plastic roof in thin silver lines. Graves stared at Nolan like the king had just misplaced the Constitution. Your Majesty, with respect, royal guardian wolves are not permitted to be housed in civilian structures. Claire looked at the patched wall, the muddy towels, the heat lamp balanced on a bag of potting soil, and said, Good news. She is leaving a 5-star establishment. Mason made the mistake of coughing into his fist. Nolan's mouth did not move, but something near his eyes almost did. Graves noticed and hated it. The argument lasted 12 minutes, which was 11 minutes longer than anyone in the Crown Guard expected an Omega from the edge of Silverpine territory to survive in a royal dispute. Claire refused to let Briar be sedated. Nolan refused to let Graves detain Claire. Briar refused everything except Claire's hand on her neck and the blanket Claire had warmed in the dryer. In the end, the entire royal convoy was held hostage by one pregnant wolf with excellent boundaries. They moved her into the back of the largest vehicle on a padded stretcher, though Briar only allowed it after Claire climbed in first and said, Fine, I will be your emotional support peasant. The wolf gave a tired huff. Nolan heard it and looked away too quickly. The drive to Silverpine Hall took almost 2 hours through wet mountain roads, past pine forests, closed gas stations, and small packed towns where people stepped onto porches as the black vehicles passed. By the time they reached the Capitol Ridge, dawn was starting to gray the sky. Silverpine Hall rose out of the mountain like somebody had decided a castle should learn American architecture and develop a parking garage. White stone, glass towers, iron balconies, old banners moving in the rain. Claire hated how beautiful it was. Beautiful places were dangerous. People trusted them too fast. When she stepped out of the vehicle, Nolan's coat was suddenly around her shoulders. She looked up, startled. I am not cold. You are shaking. That is irritation. Then consider it protective equipment. She should have handed it back. Instead, Briar leaned heavily against her leg, and Claire kept the coat because arguing with a king was one thing, but arguing while supporting 200 pounds of stubborn royal wolf was just bad time management. The courtyard froze at the sight of them. Crown guards lowered their eyes to Nolan. Servants stared at Claire's muddy jeans. A row of noble omegas waiting beneath the east arch looked at the coat on her shoulders and made several silent decisions about hating her. One woman in a cream dress whispered, "Who is she?" Claire muttered, "A person who used to have a quiet Tuesday." Nolan heard her. This time, he definitely almost smiled. Then the palace doors opened, and the pressure of pack hierarchy rolled out like heat from an oven. Council members, senior alphas, royal healers, people who had never pulled a half-dead animal from a river but clearly felt qualified to comment on towel placement. Graves moved ahead of them all. The wolf belongs in the royal kennel. Briar answered by turning her head and placing her muzzle against Claire's hip. Nolan watched the gesture, and the strange pull under Claire's ribs tightened again. His wolf was near the surface. She felt it before she understood it, a quiet force reaching toward the scent mark on her wrist. It should have scared her. Instead, it made the noise of the crowd fade for one dangerous second. Nolan looked away first. "Prepare the West recovery room," he ordered. Graves stiffened. "That room is beside the private wing." "I know where my rooms are, Elder." That shut the courtyard up nicely. Briar was taken inside, but when they tried to guide her toward the royal kennels, she planted all four paws and refused to move. Claire sighed. "Ma'am, I respect the commitment, but you are carrying 3 children and a political crisis." Briar stared at her. Claire pointed down the hall. "Fine. Pick your scandal." Briar walked straight to the door of Claire's temporary room, lowered herself across the threshold, and went to sleep like she paid rent. Later, when the palace finally quieted, Claire knelt beside Briar to check the burned crest again. Her bare fingers brushed the damaged mark. The greenhouse smell vanished. For one flashing second, she saw a stone chapel, a silver council ring, and 2 hands pushing Briar toward dark water. Claire jerked back, breath caught in her throat. Outside her door, Nolan's voice was low and sharp. "What did you see?" Claire looked down at Briar, then at the shadow of the king beyond the glass. "Someone in your palace tried to bury the truth before it could give birth." Claire should have lied. She knew that the second Nolan opened the door and stepped into the dim recovery room, his shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms, his crown ring catching the soft yellow light. Kings did not ask questions because they were curious. They asked because answers became policy. Briar slept between them, one paw curled over her belly, 3 tiny lives still fluttering under Claire's senses like candle flames in a draft. "I saw a chapel," Claire said. "Old stone. No windows. Someone wearing a council ring." Nolan's face did not change, which told her the words had landed exactly where they hurt. "Describe the ring." "Silver. Black pine etched across the top. There was oil on his sleeve. Sharp smell. Like cedar and smoke." Nolan looked toward the hall. His voice stayed calm. Too calm. "Black cedar oil is used to preserve the council chamber doors." Claire let out a tired laugh with no humor in it. "Of course it is. Around here, even the furniture has political connections." That almost reached him. Almost. His mouth softened for half a second before duty pulled it flat again. "Visions from animal contact are not admissible before the council." "Good thing I am not trying to impress your council. You accused someone inside my palace of attempted treason." "No. I said Briar remembers someone trying to erase her." Nolan stepped closer, and Briar did not wake. That mattered. Claire noticed it. So did he. The wolf inside him pressed near the surface, not wild, not threatening, just present. The air changed around Claire's skin. Warmth moved under her ribs, strange and steady, like a hand finding a locked door in the dark. Nolan stopped. His gray eyes dropped to her wrist, where Briar's protection scent had faded but not disappeared. "Does that hurt?" he asked quietly. Claire looked down. No, that was not completely true. It did not hurt like pain. It hurt like hearing a song from a house you had never lived in and still missing it. She rubbed her wrist. "It just feels loud." Nolan looked away first, which felt like an admission. "The royal healer says Briar's body is stabilizing." The royal healer also tried to touch her after she clearly voted no. Dr. Vale is loyal. To you or to the version of the truth that keeps his job? Nolan's jaw tightened. There was the king again, built out of control and long nights, and people lying politely in expensive rooms. You do not trust anyone here, he said. Claire met his eyes. I trust Briar. I trust the pups. I trust Mason when he is not being dramatic. That is my current committee. This time, Nolan did smile, barely. It changed his face in a way Claire did not appreciate at all. Then Briar shifted, whining in her sleep. Claire dropped beside her at once, palm on the wolf's belly. The smallest heartbeat flickered, dipped, then caught again. Nolan knelt across from her, all royal distance forgotten. What is wrong? Stress. Exhaustion. Maybe whatever they gave her. Claire closed her eyes, breathing slow, letting her gift settle through the wolf. Come on, little one. Stay with your mama. Nolan's hand hovered above Briar's shoulder, not touching, waiting for permission. Claire saw that, and something inside her loosened when she did not want it to. Here, she said softly. Not the wound. Just here. He placed his hand where she showed him. Briar calmed. The three pulses strengthened together, and the bond under Claire's ribs answered so sharply she almost pulled away. Nolan felt it too. His breath caught once. They looked at each other over Briar's sleeping body, close enough for silence to become dangerous, careful enough to keep it safe. Then footsteps passed outside the door. Elder Graves' voice drifted through the hall, smooth as polished stone. By sunrise, the Omega must be questioned formally. If the wolf vanishes again, the blame is already obvious. Claire went cold. Nolan stood, but too slowly. Too late. And when Claire turned back, Briar's blanket was empty. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Claire stared at the empty blanket, still shaped by Briar's body heat, and felt the room tilt sideways. Then the smallest heartbeat inside her senses fluttered from somewhere far below the palace. Weak. Afraid. Moving away. She is not gone, Claire said. Nolan was already at the door. Locked down Silver Pine Hall. His voice hit the corridor like a blade laid flat on stone. Guards snapped into motion. Bells rang once, then twice. The old internal alarm that told every wolf in the palace to stop pretending politics was more important than survival. Elder Graves appeared at the end of the hall with perfect timing and a face arranged for disappointment. How convenient, he said. The royal wolf disappears from a room guarded by the Omega, who marked her. Claire stepped into the hall. I did not mark her. She marked me. A distinction without legal value. Funny. That seems to be your favorite kind. Mason arrived breathless behind 2 guards, hair wet from the rain, jacket half-zipped. Claire, what happened? Graves turned smoothly. Your sister will explain that to the council. Nolan's gaze cut toward him. Not now. Your Majesty, with respect, this is exactly when. The wolf was a witness to treason. Now she is missing, and the last person with unrestricted access was a low-rank Omega with an undocumented gift and no pack standing. The words landed one by one, polished and poisonous. Claire waited for Nolan to stop them. He did not. Not fast enough. Not clearly enough. His silence was not agreement. She knew that. His face was tight with calculation, fear, responsibility, all the heavy things kings wore instead of honesty. But to the hallway full of guards, healers, and watching servants, silence had a shape. It looked like doubt. Claire felt something inside her pull back. Not break. Worse. Learn. You think I took her, she said. Nolan looked at her then. I think someone wants me to think that. That is not the same as saying you do not. Mason muttered. Claire. She ignored him. The bond under her ribs twisted, sharp with Briar's distant panic and something else, something that felt too much like Nolan reaching for her without knowing how. She stepped away from it. Away from him. Graves lifted his chin. Until the wolf is recovered, Miss Whitaker should be confined. Nolan's jaw tightened. She will be placed under protection. Claire laughed once, low and stunned. That is a beautiful palace word for locked up. Claire, Nolan said, quieter. This keeps you alive while I find out who moved Briar. No. It keeps your counsel calm while you decide how much of me you can afford to believe. That hit him. She saw it in the way his hand flexed at his side, in the brief flash of pain he buried before anyone else could read it. But buried pain did not help Briar. Buried pain did not save pups. 2 guards escorted Claire to the West Tower, polite enough to make it worse. Mason tried to follow until Nolan stopped him with a look and said, "Stay where I can reach you." Graves smiled like a man watching a door close exactly as planned. The tower room was warm, expensive, and locked from the outside. Claire stood at the window overlooking the rain-dark courtyard while search teams moved below in tight formation. Nolan stood among them, giving orders with the cold precision of a king who had learned that panic was a luxury. He never looked up. Claire told herself she was glad. Then Mason appeared an hour later through the laundry passage behind the wardrobe, because apparently old palaces were only secure if nobody had sisters. He pushed a muddy strip of wire into her hand. "Found this near the service stairs. Same kind as the river trap." Claire touched it and smelled sharp oil through the rust. Black cedar. Council chamber doors. Her stomach dropped. Then, beneath the floor, through stone, distance, and fear, Briar called again. 3 tiny heartbeats flickered in the dark, weaker now, pulling toward the old chapel under the hill. Claire closed her fingers around the wire. "Mason," she whispered, "I need a way out." Mason had always been good at 2 things: getting into trouble and pretending it was a maintenance issue. 10 minutes after Claire asked for a way out, he had the wardrobe pulled aside, a flashlight between his teeth, and one hand on a narrow stone latch that looked older than every law currently ruining her life. "For the record," he said, voice muffled, "this is a terrible idea." Claire tied her hair back with a strip of torn sleeve. "You say that every time my ideas work." "I say that because your ideas usually involve injured wildlife, angry officials, or both. Tonight we have both, so at least I am consistent." The passage behind the wall smelled like dust, old soap, and cold stone. It sloped downward beneath Silver Pine Hall, past laundry vents, storage pipes, and the kind of darkness that made every sound feel personal. Claire kept one palm against the wall and the other pressed to her ribs, following the pull of Briar's fear. 3 tiny heartbeats flickered below her. Not steady anymore. Not safe. Mason stayed behind her, carrying a small medical bag he had stolen from a supply closet. "Borrowed," he whispered when she looked at him. "From people who were using it incorrectly." Above them, bells rang again. The moon assembly was starting early. Graves was not waiting for Briar to be found. He was already building the story with Claire as the villain, because men like Graves loved an audience more than they loved the truth. The tunnel opened near the old chapel under the hill, a forgotten stone room where Silver Pine Alpha Kings had sworn their first oaths before the new throne hall was built above it. Claire pushed through a warped wooden door and stopped. Briar lay near the old altar, breathing hard, tangled in a silver thread net that glimmered faintly under the emergency lights. Bundles of bitter herbs hung from the stone arch, filling the room with a sharp cedar smoke scent that made Claire's eyes water. Mason swore under his breath. Claire dropped to her knees beside the wolf. "Hey, Mama. I found you." Briar's eyes opened, dull with exhaustion, then sharpened when she saw Claire. Her tail moved once against the floor. Even now, the ridiculous animal wanted credit for staying alive. Claire cupped her face with both hands. "Yes, very brave. Deeply inconvenient, but brave." She cut the net carefully, avoiding Briar's skin, then pressed her palm to the swollen belly. The smallest heartbeat dipped. Claire went cold. "No, no, you do not get to disappear on me." She breathed in slowly and let her gift open. Warmth poured out of her, quiet and costly, threading through Briar, through the pups, through the shaking place where fear had wrapped itself around life. Mason knelt across from her, holding the light steady. "Claire, you are turning white." "Then stop looking at my face." Footsteps sounded in the tunnel. Mason turned, but it was Nolan who stepped into the chapel, coat dark with rain, eyes locked on Claire like the whole palace had narrowed to one point. He took in the net, the herbs, the council oil, Briar, Claire shaking beside her, and something in him changed. Not loudly. That was the frightening part. His control did not break. It became sharper. "Who did this?" he asked. Claire could barely lift her hand. Briar answered for her. With a weak growl, she hooked one paw beneath the straw and dragged out a strip of charcoal fabric marked with the black pine crest of Elder Graves. Nolan looked at it for one silent second. Then he knelt beside Claire, not above her, not commanding, just there. "Tell me what to do." The words hit harder than any apology could have. Claire swallowed. "Hold the light. Keep her calm. And this time, Believe me before it becomes convenient. Pain moved across his face. I do. Above them, the assembly horns sounded through the stone. Graves' voice followed through the speaker system, smooth and public. The Omega Claire Whitaker has fled custody. The Crown must now consider her an active threat to the throne. Claire closed her eyes, one hand on Briar, one hand on the pups. Nolan stood, carrying the evidence in his fist. Then we should not keep the throne waiting. By the time Claire reached the throne hall, the whole pack had already been taught how to look at her. Suspicion sat on every face like it had been assigned seating. Senior alphas stood along the marble aisle. Noble omegas gathered under the silver banners. Council members waited beside the oath circle, polished and solemn, as if they had not just lost a pregnant wolf in their own palace and decided the best solution was blaming the muddy woman who kept saving her. Elder Graves stood at the center of it all, one hand over his heart, voice smooth enough to make lies sound house-trained. A kingdom survives by order, he said, not by sentimental weakness, not by undocumented gifts, not by a low-rank Omega who walks into royal bloodlines and calls it mercy. The doors opened behind him. Every head turned. Claire came in first because Briar refused to move unless she did. Mason walked on her left with the medical bag. Nolan walked on her right, carrying the torn strip of charcoal fabric in one hand and looking colder than the stone under his boots. Behind them, Briar limped into the hall, huge, silver, exhausted, and very much alive. The silence hit hard. Someone gasped. One of the noble Omegas whispered, "That is impossible." Claire heard Briar huff softly, as if she agreed that everyone here was behind on basic reality. Graves recovered first. Men like him always did. "Your Majesty," he said, turning toward Nolan. "You see how thoroughly she has influenced the animal. The wolf follows her commands even now." Claire stopped at the edge of the oath circle. "She follows trust. I can see how that confused you." A few people reacted before they could stop themselves. Nolan did not smile. His eyes stayed on Graves. "Miss Whitaker will speak." Graves stiffened. "She has no standing in this chamber. She has mine." That moved through the hall like thunder without sound. Claire felt the bond under her ribs flare, not sweet, not simple, but steady. Nolan was not speaking over her. He was opening the door and standing back. Claire stepped into the circle. Her hands shook, so she curled them into fists and let everyone see it. "I found Briar in the Blackwater River with a burned royal crest and wire around her leg. I brought her home because she was pregnant and dying, not because I had a political strategy. My truck has one working headlight. I am not exactly equipped for treason." Mason muttered, "That is true." Claire kept going. She laid out the wire from the river, the matching wire from the service stairs, the herbs from the old chapel, and the cloth Briar had pulled from the straw. Then she lifted the strip of fabric high enough for the front row to see the black pine crest. Graves' crest. Graves' face changed by one careful inch. It was enough. Dr. Vale, the royal healer, stepped back. Briar noticed. Of course she noticed. The wolf turned her head slowly toward him, and the doctor went pale before anyone accused him of anything. Nolan's voice cut across the hall. "Dr. Vale." The man swallowed. "I was told the herbs would calm her." Graves snapped. Silence. That single word ruined him. No innocent man sounded that afraid of an answer. Claire looked at Nolan. This was his kingdom, his wound, his betrayal. For the first time since she had met him, he looked less like a throne and more like a man realizing how much rot had been hidden in the walls around him. Briar moved then. Step by painful step, she crossed the oath circle and placed her head under Claire's hand. Then she turned her back on Graves. The hall understood before Claire did. The royal guardian wolf had rejected a council elder in front of the entire pack. Nolan walked to Claire's side, but not in front of her. "I failed Miss Whitaker," he said, each word clear. "I protected the crown so fiercely that I nearly let a liar use it against an innocent woman." He faced Graves. "You are removed from council authority pending pack tribunal." Guards moved in. Graves did not fight. He only looked at Claire with a smile thin enough to cut paper. A mate bond will not save his throne from what is coming. Claire felt Nolan go still beside her. Briar growled low, and under Claire's palm, 3 tiny heartbeats answered like drums before a storm. Graves was taken from the throne hall before sunset, not with chains and shouting, but with the quiet finality of a man whose power had depended on everyone being too afraid to name it. That was how old corruption ended in Silverpine, not dramatically, but with guards no longer lowering their eyes. Dr. Vale confessed before the Pack Tribunal that Graves had ordered the sedative herbs, changed the patrol route, and burned Briar's crest so the royal guardian line could be declared broken. The tribunal stripped Graves of his council seat, his voting rights, and his claim to any future crown appointment. It was not revenge. Claire would have enjoyed revenge for maybe 10 minutes. This was better. This was the Pack deciding that loyalty without truth was just obedience wearing a nicer coat. Briar survived the night. So did the pups. That was the part Claire cared about most, though the palace kept trying to make her care about ceremonies, witness statements, and whether her boots were appropriate for walking near historical carpets. 3 days later, under a pale morning sky, Briar gave birth in the West Recovery Room while half the palace pretended not to wait outside the door. Mason brought coffee. Nolan stood by the window, sleeves rolled up again, looking like a man who had faced border wars with less fear than one tired mother wolf and 3 newborn pups. When the first pup squeaked, every wolf in Silverpine Hall answered. Not loudly, reverently, like the whole pack remembered something it had almost lost. Claire sat back on her heels, exhausted, laughing softly through tears she refused to explain. Briar licked one pup, then shoved her nose against Claire's knee as if to say, "Do not get sentimental. We are busy." "Yes, ma'am," Claire whispered. "I would never accuse you of having feelings." Nolan looked at her then, and the bond between them settled into the quiet instead of fighting it. He did not reach for her like he had a right. He did not ask her to forgive him because the pack was watching. He waited until the room was still, until the pups were warm, until Claire had washed her hands and stopped shaking. Then he said, "I owe you more than an apology." Claire leaned against the counter, too tired to be polite for free. "That is a strong opening. I doubted you when truth was standing in front of me covered in river mud. To be fair, I was also yelling at your counsel. You were correct. That helps." His mouth softened, but his eyes stayed serious. "I was raised to believe the crown came first. Before comfort, before trust, before my own wolf. I thought that made me strong." He looked toward Briar and the sleeping pups. "It made me slow to protect what mattered." Claire held his gaze. "A crown is not worth much if it only hears people with titles. I know that now. Knowing is the easy part." Nolan nodded. "Then stay long enough to see if I can do the hard part." She should have said no. A cleaner story would have ended with her driving back to her cabin, rescuing strays, and pretending her ribs did not ache every time he was near. But life did not always hand people clean endings. Sometimes it handed them a damaged kingdom, 3 newborn wolf pups, a stubborn mate bond, and a king who had finally learned how to listen. The public ceremony happened at dusk, in the same throne hall where Claire had been accused. This time, no one told her where to stand. Nolan stepped before the pack and named her Royal Wolf Healer under crown protection, not as a favor, not as a prize, but as recognition earned in mud, rain, and truth. Claire's knees nearly gave out halfway up the steps because healing Briar had taken more from her than she had admitted. Nolan saw it before anyone else did. He crossed the distance, lifted her carefully in his arms, and carried her the last few steps to the throne platform. The hall went silent. Claire looked at him, startled. Nolan only said, low enough for her alone, "Not because you are weak." She swallowed. "Then why?" "Because power should know when to kneel and when to carry." Briar lay below the throne with her pups tucked against her side. One tiny silver pup wobbled forward, planted both front paws on Claire's boot, and gave a small, determined howl. The throne bond answered through the hall, deep and ancient, not choosing bloodline alone, but courage, mercy, and the Omega who had refused to let a mother be erased. And for the first time in years, Silverpine did not feel ruled. It felt led.